Good morning. This is Ernie Lewis, the pastor of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Thursday. As we look this week at the word grace in the Word of God, we see that the Apostle Paul gives all the glory and all the credit for his life of missionary duty to God's grace. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 9, he says, "For I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace toward me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God, which was with me." Although Paul felt like he was an apostle, and yet he calls himself an apostle out of due time, he was really called after the life and ministry of Jesus Christ was here on the earth. But Paul's testimony was he wasn't really worthy to be an apostle, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. You know, so many folks in our day today want to boast about their accomplishments in life. They call themselves a self-made man. They say, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I was determined to become something and I finally made it. It's all about me. That's not what Paul says at all here. I believe Paul was a determined man. I believe through his travels and his ministry, we see that he was able to overcome all sorts of adversity from city to city. But you hear Paul boasting in God's grace, not his own abilities. It is a real gift that God gave him to overcome beatings, to overcome imprisonment and trials, and even the personal attacks by his enemies all along the way. Now, Paul will also point out that God's grace was not in vain here. It was not wasted on him. He says, I labored more abundantly than they all. He tells us in his epistles how he was a tent maker by night, working with Aquila and Priscilla in order to make a living along the way. And then he could preach in the synagogues and in the marketplaces all day long. So Paul was determined. He was hardworking, and he never quit in his ministry. You know, we live in a day where burnout seems to be oftentimes taking its toll upon ministers of the gospel. But Paul said, I labored abundantly. And he says, yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. The real source of Paul's success and the secret of success in ministry was the fact that the grace of God was covering him. The fact that he had many who were saved during his ministry, many converts, many churches that he had built along the way in his travels, many miles that he had traveled, and of course, many things that he had faced as far as adversity. Paul says it was all by the grace of God. It was the grace of God which was with me. This enduring, overcoming grace or gift that the Lord gave him propelled him on throughout all the troubles that he faced. So when we consider our accomplishments or our accolades in this life, let us not forget about giving the credit to the grace of God in our lives. It is abundant. It is a driving force. It is overcoming for so many obstacles that we face here in this world. And Paul's testimony was, by the grace of God, I am what I am. And I hope that's our testimony today too.